This show is part of the HeadStuff podcast network.
Science.
Learning.
The future.
Regeneration.
They're attractive.
They're very attractive.
Hot and loud.
And a little bit sad.
He was the best guy around.
Oh my, is it hot in here or what?
You're an attractive guy.
It's the fabulous Tony Cantwell.
I'm talking about Shane Daniel Byrne.
It's Science Week, the 10th to the 17th of November. Science Week is happening, and it's happening right now.
All over the country.
We are Science Week. Sorry.
We are Science Week. I was just going to say, it's on all the events are at scienceweek.ie. There's events all the way through from the 10th to 17th of November.
Yes, the theme for this year's Science Week is
Regeneration.
regeneration.
What does regeneration mean for you?
Well, I think it means that, it's like the things.
It's how Dr. Connors made himself a new arm, but accidentally turned into a lizard.
We're talking-
and Spider-Man had
Spider-Man.
to keep fighting it.
Thank you
Yes.
for saying what I was thinking, Shane. I appreciate it. So that's the theme of this year's Science Week. So
The
check it
decisions
out.
we make today will have a great impact on our future.
Don't
Yes.
worry, it gets a lot smarter than this because we've got a phenomenal guest, which is Barry Smyth, who's a professor of computer sciences in UCD, and he's somewhat of a AI expert, and that's what we're going to be talking to him about. Finally, I get to talk about AI loads.
Yeah, but can I ask, right? It was a real different episode.
It was a very different episode. You kept calling him a grown-up, which
You're also a grown-up.
We are all grown-ups.
What do you mean?
Well, when he was here, you'll see he's kind of. So you're like obviously a grown-up, like you're an adult. There was a lot of that.
I meant he's a grown-up man established in his field. That's kind of
Okay.
what I was going for.
I think you are too.
Look, whatever. Anyway,
Anna, we're just kids.
I was curious. Actually, more of a thing. Are you mad at me? I was actually going to full up straight. Are you mad at me because I feel like I was asking questions of like poo-pooing it?
No,
feel
but
like
I
you
love
were-
it because I was
you
so.
love AI.
I
was like,
up AI's circuits.
yeah, you were
Yes.
licking AI circuitry.
Yeah, I was.
And I'm like, and then I was. You know what? I actually had a social panic in my head of like, Tony thinks I'm being too robust here, and I was like, Barry doesn't mind. Barry loves that.
Yeah,
That's
loves
it's just
it.
part of her and I was
robust-
like, I was wondering. I started getting self-conscious in the middle because I was like wondering. See, we had a chat, and you think it's going to go one way when you chat to the man, and then it's different, isn't it?
Yeah.
This is like the
I
time.
think, yeah.
There's there's funny things.
This is like the time.
This is like the time that the Nice Treaty was happening, and independent TD Finney McGrath came in and told us why we shouldn't vote in the Nice Treaty, and we were like, oh my god, yeah, we shouldn't vote in the Nice Treaty. And then Ivor Callally came in and was like, you should vote in the Nice Treaty. I was like, oh my god, we definitely should vote in the Nice Treaty.
Yeah.
So I definitely have a lot of kind of like recency bias of the literal last thing that I've heard.
That's how
But
I
I did
am.
go in this pretty biased.
Recency bias.
Anyway,
It is tricky to talk about. It's actually, even though we're talking about computers, it is really emotional. Like, so I think
Yeah.
people will be listening to this kind of going like, what are they doing on this podcast? It's proper juicy.
It is.
They're like, why are you this is just an ad. It's not. There's more to it. It is an ad.
It is an ad, yeah.
It's sponsored by Science Week. But
Thank
like,
you very much,
there
Science Week.
is more. It is juicy. We do have good
Yeah.
crack with Barry, and he was good crack.
He was good crack.
And up for the laugh. But
I think
didn't
you
get
would
a lot
be a
of stuff.
good presenter. Like you'd be a good, I don't know, Claire Byrne.
You were very good. You were
you're
very
almost
good.
like
Oh,
an,
me? No,
Yeah.
I finished talking
almost
to me
like
now.
an
I'm okay.
AI model. You've consumed so much RTE debate
Oh,
that
it was
you have
pure RTE
you've
one.
Ready to
machine
go.
learned how to be an RTE
Of course, we
debate
talked
person.
about that, but of course, we do have to talk about some of the scarier sides. You were very good at being. You had that kind of like, yes, and of course, there are positive, but of course, there's some negatives. And then you were like, oh, no, the negatives, but there are some
I
positives.
was thinking,
it was
but I
very
was
good.
thinking of the audience, but I was thinking of myself because I was like, if I heard someone else's podcast and they're going to talk about AI, I'd be like, ask them about how it's going to fuck up the environment right now. Like, I'd be like, and you only have a limited amount of time to talk about all the things.
I think when I was going into it, for some reason I was going to be like, for some reason I thought Barry Smyth is the man who invented and created AI. When he is absolutely not. He's a professor and like he has studied it and he has a great interest in it and he knows a lot about it. He didn't invent it. He's not the
No.
representative of AI. I feel like during the interview, which
You will
be
see.
coming up right
It's coming
now,
up. It's a bit meta talking about it
I
now.
think you were doing sort of combat devil advocate, maybe putting a bit of
I'm only asking questions.
only asking
Oh,
questions.
you know me. I'm real devil's advocate.
Yeah, he was very, he was very camp. He was very camp.
And I wanted him to love me.
I was
And
interested
then
in the things as well.
Tony wanted him to love you. I felt like I was thick boy in the corner asking
Oh,
thick
I didn't
questions.
feel you were.
No,
No, I didn't feel
Think
you
I was a
were.
bit
No, not at
dumb.
all.
I was just listening a lot because
But do let us know. Did you listening to the interview? Do you think Killian was dumb? Let
Do
us
I have
know.
to wear the Young Hot Guy's dunce cap?
Don't
Us to know and don't let him know. Now, this all feels very kind of weird because you're about to see this chat chat right now. But after
we just had it.
We literally just had the chat. But as he left, and we all kind of felt, okay, we can understand the challenges, but it's a bit of a hopeful future. As Barry was leaving, Killian goes, yeah, we'll see about that. It's like, yeah. And I was like, all right, it feels like the opposite of the kind of chat we had.
Let's head over to Tony Cantwell. Tony, tell us who we're chatting to today on Young Hot Guys.
We're going to be chatting to Barry Smyth. Now, Barry is a full professor.
Barry Smyth.
Professor. I was about to say Barry Professor, full professor.
Okay, sorry.
Okay. Leave this in, Hilary. Professor Barry Smyth is a full professor at University College Dublin, where he holds the digital chair of computer science in the School of Computer Science. He's also the founding director of Insight Research Ireland Centre for Data Analytics. He's also a phenomenal man, quite handsome, and he does marathons. I looked on his Instagram.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Well, if you want to hear my chat, stay tuned, because here it comes. We'll head over. I think Shane is joining us live. Shane, head over to you. Well, thank you very much, Shane. And it is a very exciting day in studio in the Young Hot Guys land.
It is.
Very exciting.
We have a guest, and it's a grown-up guest. We were not telling you about him. Welcome to the podcast. Barry, welcome.
Thank you.
Is it the most exciting podcast appearance you've made?
Certainly this week.
That's big.
Okay, right. Pressure's on.
It is Science
only
Week, so
podcast.
there's a lot of hot demand for Barry. So
I know we're here to talk about AI, but you were telling us your background, as well as your academia, your background is in pirate radio.
Yeah, that's right.
yeah, you did have your own podcast.
Yeah, I did.
before.
Yeah, back in the 80s.
What was the format?
Oh, well, it was very exciting of its day now, I must say. So you need to imagine a small FM transmitter that reached the next door neighbour and pumping out the tunes.
Well, I'd say you have more listeners than us.
So the lady across the road could hear the tunes you put on in your house.
So she said.
You always had a curious mind. Okay, that's good.
And this was a Star Trek toy. Were you playing any kind of Energizer kind of sounds on it, halfway through the song indents?
I doubt it. I'd say it was probably Summer Lovin' from Greece or something like that.
And we've had another request for Summer Lovin' again, because it's the only record we have. No, we're not going to be talking about that. We are going to be talking about AI. AI is a topic that I bring up too much on the podcast, I think, sometimes. And you tell me to kind of shut up a little bit about it.
Yeah, he's often bringing up AI because he uses it a lot in his comedy. Most of his shows have been written by AI.
No.
No, that's not true.
I use it sometimes to come up with bad jokes, so I can be like, oh, all right, let me fix this. Do you know what I mean? And sometimes, remember I used AI that time we had a gig in Dalkey, and I was like, give me an opening joke for Dalkey, and AI was all like, why did the seagull go to Dalkey for a rockin' clockin' music festival at the Dalkey seaside? And I was like, I think our jobs are fine, because that joke is really bad.
Okay. That part is okay at the moment, but they do want people to make TV shows and all that of it as well. Anyway, we'll talk about loads of that. You're here as an expert. Are you an expert on AI? Is that like, I mean, what's your...
He's too humble. He won't say it.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
So when did I start in AI?
Yeah.
Because I was thinking
begin?
of like, you're a grown-up man, so like when you were doing your...
We're the same age.
Yeah, but when you were doing your undergrad, they weren't going, and of course, AI models, you know what I mean? That wasn't something they talked about. Like, and now it just feels like we're in an explosion of everyone talks about AI every day, and every ad I get on Twitter is like, you need to learn AI right now. Like, what were you doing that brought you all the way to here that you're talking to young hot guys about AI?
Yeah, AI has been around for a long time. So I started, I suppose, professionally in AI, let's say, 1991.
Right.
I was doing my PhD in Trinity. I was working as an AI researcher for Hitachi, who had a lab in Trinity at the time, and I've been in AI since then.
And what was, so now, with AI, and a lot of people, use different words. Apple just says intelligence because they don't want to have the AI kind of factor, or, language learning models and stuff. So in 91, would that be you actually giving it information to learn to replicate, or were people at the time trying to replicate a human brain in the digital sphere?
Yeah.
What did it look like?
Back then, I suppose in the 90s was when machine learning was starting to become a thing. So I suppose to rewind, maybe to go back a little bit. If you go back to the 1950s, you'll start to hear about AI. Alan Turing wrote a paper in 1950 talking about intelligent machines and could machines be intelligent in a similar way to humans. He came up with this idea of, well, how would we know? So he came up with the Turing test. And the Turing test is basically a human interacting with the machine, asking it questions, getting answers, and are they able to determine whether that's a machine or a person at the end of the line? And if they think it's a person, then and it's a machine, then that machine has fooled them into thinking it's intelligent. I think nowadays we don't particularly see the Turing test as a great test of intelligence per se, but that's
like to leave in search. Much like to leave in search.
Absolutely.
But it dates back to the 50s and 60s. I think the phrase artificial intelligence was first coined in 1955, if I'm not mistaken, at a conference in Dartmouth in the US. And then during the 50s and 60s, people started to think about, well, how can we make machines behave a little bit more intelligently? There was a lot of enthusiasm for AI over the years, and then it would flop, and then there'd be more enthusiasm again, it would flop. So you'll often hear people talk about an AI winter, where we thought it was going to be great, and then turned out to be not so much at all. So if you look back over the years, there was a lot of excitement about things called expert systems in the late 70s and 80s. With expert systems, you would build systems by encoding lots of human knowledge. So if you think about building a medical assistant, you would give it lots of information about medical diseases, and you would be able to ask it questions, and it would respond with other questions. So what does the patient present with? Okay, so they have a high temperature. Okay, what age are they? Okay, they're a child. All right, have they taken fluids today, et cetera, and you gradually bring you to a diagnosis. That's an expert system. All of the information, the human rules that govern that diagnosis have been coded into a software program. Then to go back to your question, when I was starting out, people realized that, it may be possible, instead of programming these systems with lots of rules and lots of knowledge, what if we tried to teach them by showing them examples? And this is what is meant by machine learning. So machine learning systems and large language models and deep learning, they're all types of machine learning systems. They're all about presenting computers with huge amounts of data and letting them figure out the patterns in that data, hopefully in a way that solves a useful problem.
It seems like AI has exploded at the moment. People are talking about it. Was there some did they have a eureka moment or something? Or how come it's so big now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure if there was a single eureka moment, but what has been happening over the last number of decades is computing power has been increasing very rapidly. The amount of data that's available has been increasing very rapidly. And now we're training larger and larger AI models, machine learning models. We've more data and we can train them more efficiently with all of this compute power. There have been some sort of fundamental algorithmic changes. People have come up with new models and they have enabled things like ChatGPT and large language models. It's been quite surprising how well those models have worked. I don't think, going back a few years, if someone had told you that we're just going to throw all the internet at this thing and let it figure out all the patterns it can and see what we get, I think you'd say, well, that won't be very useful. God knows what you'll get back from it. And lo and behold, it turns out to be pretty impressive.
Sometimes there's science just like that. They're like, well, let's just see what happens if we do this.
Yeah.
But they put it out there like with OpenAI actually allowing something to be public and then for people to actually be hands-on with it kind of for the first time. I think that started a lot of the conversation about it recently. There was a big story recently with OpenAI and Sam Altman where, because obviously OpenAI is kind of wasn't necessarily a commercially based minded company. It was more about the kind of the curating and the kind of chaperoning of AI, and that was the original not-for-profit model.
Yeah.
And then Sam Altman, the CEO, was ousted, was attempted. There was a kind of a coup, basically, trying to get rid of him. And then people started talking about, is there something that the board have seen about AI that they are maybe threatened by, that they're looking to radically change? Do you have any insight into what that might have been as to why they were trying to oust him? And
have you been speaking to Sam?
You've been speaking to Sam? Yeah. Do you return your calls?
Not for a while. No, I think there was a lot of conspiracy theories around that, and people were talking about, it's become self-aware.
That's Tony's vibe, by the way. You're talking to the right man about conspiracy theories. He loves it.
I don't suppose that's what happened. I think it was probably the usual sort of corporate push and shove going on. And for about a week there, it looked like Microsoft were going to basically rehire all the people in OpenAI, and then they got their act back together.
We've been having the same difficulty with Science Week just to organise this. But the corporate push and shove from those people, I'll tell you, they know what they're doing. But there's been AI, like there's difference. Machine learning is a separate thing that we talk about separately. But there's been AI bits for years. Like it's predictive text. When we used to have the button phones, and you used to type every letter, you press 4, it's that many times to get an I or whatever, and then it started to go, do you mean this word? I used to like it because if you tried to write the word bitch, it would come up CHUBI. So then I would, like chubby for some reason, that's the word I wanted. And I
Why
used
were
to write,
you writing that word so
and then
much?
I'd call people a chubby
Killian.
bitch. Anyway, but that's one of them. Is that the kind of thing they've taught? Is that a patterny thing, or is that part of it?
I mean, well, interestingly, predictive text is very similar in spirit to large language models, which drive ChatGPT.
Right.
It's just that with predictive text, you were typically using the most recent word to predict the next word, or the last 2 words to predict the next word. Now models like ChatGPT use hundreds or even thousands of words to predict the next word. That's all these large language models are doing. When you type in a question, it is essentially saying, given that question, what is the next most likely word that I would expect to see?
Okay.
And then what's the next most likely one after that, and the one after that? And when you're doing that at scale, you get reasonable answers. But to answer your question, predictive text, I suppose, could be viewed as a type of AI. I think it's useful to think there's different categories of AI. I mentioned expert systems, which is about sort of if-then rules. So you could imagine coding up hundreds or thousands of if-then rules to diagnose engine faults in a car, for instance, or make medical diagnoses. Then they evolved into knowledge-based systems where we tried to encode much more of human knowledge. And there was a lot of efforts to see, could we encode common sense knowledge? Because that was the thing about early AI systems. They were very brittle. So when you developed an expert system to diagnose engine faults in your car, that wouldn't be able to tell you anything else other than engine faults in your car, So you had to build an entirely new system. Didn't have common sense knowledge and couldn't learn by itself. So then knowledge-based systems became a thing. All during this time as well, people were playing around with things called neural networks, which are these brain-inspired models. But they never seemed to do too much because they were complicated and difficult to train, and we didn't have the computing power.
So you're trying to replicate this, like the neural pathways as kind of circuitry for a computer.
So you literally built these artificial neurons in software, and you connected them up to other neurons. And then you learned you'd present an example and tell it, okay, here's a picture, here's an image, and this is an image which has, let's say, trees in it. I want you to learn about images that have trees and don't have trees. Here's another image that doesn't have trees. Here's an image that does have trees. Here's
click on all the boxes that are a bike or traffic light.
The bike's only in the bottom corner of the picture.
Yeah,
Will I
what
click
part
it or
of it
not?
though? Yeah,
that's collecting training data for Google's AI. That's what they're doing there with those captures.
But isn't that how babies learn anyway? Just the repetition of they read the same you read them the same books, so they're kind of going, okay, cat, that's a cat, I get it. And they're piecing it together. So they're
So certainly by presenting lots of examples, humans seem to learn from examples. It's perhaps not so surprising that machines learn from examples as well. So machine learning was quite a big and radical change. We no longer had to code up these AI systems. We could focus on training them. The problem is then that it became difficult. Sometimes you wouldn't be sure what it had learned. So there's a kind of apocryphal story about the US military trying to develop a machine learning system that would be able to detect tanks in an image or enemy tanks in an image. And you'd show it thousands of pictures. Some of them had enemy tanks in them, some of them didn't. And lo and behold, when you tested it on other images, it seemed to do quite well. Later then, it was realized, all of the images that had tanks in them were on sunny days with blue skies. All the ones without tanks were on cloudy days. What it had actually learned was sunny days versus cloudy days. Yeah. That's one of the challenges with machine learning systems is how do you guide it to learn the right thing when you're presenting it thousands and thousands of examples?
The thing I get a lot is I'm like scared or like scared of AI. Like sometimes I'll see, an
okay to
AI
share. It's
song
okay
has
to
been
share.
made, or that kind of thing. You see AI making a song, or you see AI fulfilling some sort of role that is someone else's job, or I see a painting that AI has done, and it's not that great, but you can see the assumption with AI is always that it's going to get much better, and this is just the start. And even though it's obviously not the start, it's been going on for a very long time. But like, I see a really nice painting done by AI, and I kind of automatically go like, that's terrible. Oh no.
You don't
like
connect
that's
to it.
scary or something like that. Like why is so much of the conversation about AI based in some sort of like fear and like scare? Like what is that? And is it right to feel that way?
Let's do the doom and gloom section.
Yes,
Let's do it. Let's do
I
it.
suppose people are uncertain about what the future holds, and it does seem to be different this time. We have built AI systems that are far less brittle than they were before, and these generative AI systems, like large language model systems, seem to be able to converse with us in natural language and produce imagery and music,
And
do a very fine
other people's
job.
actual voices as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, do a really
with
good
breaths
job.
and
Yeah.
with pauses and everything that they do.
And correct intonation.
But I even feel like 10 years ago, things didn't pass the Turing test, and now that's not even a factor
Yeah.
anymore because we've so surpassed that.
Yeah.
And that was the viewed as the line. After that line, it's
it's one of the things that's very difficult to predict. People talk about exponential growth in technology, and the problem with that is that exponential growth is one of those hockey curves. So it goes along at a reasonable sort of growth, and then all of a sudden shoots up. And the question is, are we at that point where it's about to really shoot up? And we might be.
And what will happen then?
Well, then, these AI systems are going to be able to help us develop even more powerful AI systems. And we do need to be careful. We do need to think about how do we develop AI responsibly? What features of society and human life do we kind of give over to AIs to control? So I think people are rightfully cautious. Governments are beginning to think about regulation. A lot of work in academia is now focusing on responsible AI and ethical AI. There's a whole host of important issues.
Before, okay, we'll do those scary bits now in a sec about the cautious. But what's the really exciting bits? Because I know that one of the things I was reading about it is that you're talking about pattern recognition, and that can be very good for cancer. They can be like this is the thing, or that always looks at our
weather
brains,
events.
weather, all that kind of thing. What's the really exciting bits that could really help?
Yeah, I think healthcare is a big one. If you think about it now, certainly in Ireland, the turnaround time to kind of get a scan and get it interpreted, it could take certainly days, if not weeks, to get back. Now, you can imagine now there are AI systems that do a very good job of interpreting X-rays and scans and things like that. It's not that you would hand over all of the decision making to an AI, but it may be able to better triage the backlog of scans, and all of a sudden you're making better use of the consultant's time. So I think there's huge potential there. The Nobel Prize in chemistry this year was given to AI, right? So Dennis.
Who picked it up though? Who held it though?
Who got the $1 million?
A guy called Dennis Hassibis, who's a Google DeepMind researcher, and his colleague John Jumper, if memory serves correctly. They shared the Nobel Prize in chemistry for a system called AlphaFold. And what AlphaFold does is it solves...
Fold your jumper.
That's our top drawer stuff.
One of the big problems in biology was, how do proteins work? And to understand how proteins work, you need to understand how they fold themselves up. And we couldn't solve this. It's a really difficult problem. And scientists have been trying to figure out how these proteins fold themselves up into interesting and useful shapes for decades, and we couldn't do it at scale. Along comes AlphaFold. They trained it up like a machine learning type model, and lo and behold, it did a spectacularly better job of predicting protein folding. And what that means now is essentially, I think most, if not all, of the proteins known to us, we now have accurate predictions about how they will fold. And from there, that leads to a whole host of new treatments, drug discovery, and therapies. So that's a really good example of something that just wasn't possible before this technology came.
Do you see, say, with jobs that are fairly knowledge-based, or even in school? Remember when calculators came in and it felt like it was cheating, and you could have a calculator in maths.
Yeah, we were one of the first years that calculator was part of the...
And we could just sit there and be like, this feels like cheating.
That is cheating.
It is cheating. But do you think Do you think on the horizon that in school we'll have a similar scientific calculator that is the knowledge retention side of things, and the learning will be more in terms of the interpretive aspects of it or the creativity side of things? Do you see that on the horizon?
I think so. I think we will have to figure out how do we use these tools, and we will have to figure out how do we teach kids to use these tools properly. We don't want to give up on teaching the fundamentals. We still teach kids how to add and multiply and subtract and divide, even though they have calculators. And I remember many years ago, I think it was 1997 was a big moment for AI back in the day, because IBM built a system called Deep Blue that could play chess, and it beat Garry Kasparov.
Oh, yeah.
And everyone said, well, that's the end of chess. Like,
Well,
who's
didn't
gonna
Garry
play chess?
Kasparov say he felt some of the moves that Deep Blue made were very human?
Yeah.
That's what he said when he got beaten with it.
yeah.
No, that was a human.
So, and what happened then is that people started using computers and collaborating with computers as they were playing chess, and chess evolved in a certain way. And I think AI is exciting because it brings to the fore a host of new tools, sort of knowledge-based tools. We will have experts in our pocket that can help us become more productive, hopefully help us learn more effectively, and free us up to do more interesting work. That's the kind of optimistic view.
Somebody has to be in charge of all that, though. It feels like we talk on this podcast before about we're a crap generation of men. We're so soft. We can't do. Our dads could build things and put up shelves and do drilling and know
Shane
everything.
couldn't put, the bit in the car that holds up the boot.
The parcel tray.
The parcel tray. He couldn't put that.
I couldn't figure out how to put it
He
up.
couldn't put it in.
ChatGPT will sort that out.
Yeah, no, ChatGPT can help with that. But like, who's going to be? How do we all like? We still teach the kids at the moment. We still teach them this, that, and the other, the multiplication, add, divide, subtract. But how do we make sure that we don't then just piss around with it? Then it's like we have all the AI do all that stuff. It's grand. How do we? Who's like? Is that a school thing? Is it a government thing? Is it a family thing?
I'm curious as well. What do you think are going to be the fundamental things to actually teach children? If knowledge retention is not the factor anymore, like the Leaving Cert, that's all it is. That's all it test is. If that's not the key factor in whatever 30 hours of education a week in terms of actually storing all that knowledge, I'm sure that'll be part factor. Yeah. But like, do you think is critical thought, is creativity, are these the things to focus more on educating?
I think that's always going to be the case. Even all through the education system, it's certainly the high value skills are the critical thinking skills, the creativity, taking advantage of your imagination. You need fundamental skills, reading, writing, basic arithmetic, that still needs to be there. I think that'll continue to be the case. But even more so in an age of AI, understanding how to interpret and validate and evaluate information, how to put that information together to get something new out of it. They're really important skills. There's a sense in which, wouldn't it be great if kids were able to do more with their time and be more productive with their time and be more creative with their time? One of the really exciting areas, I think, for AI, although I can imagine creative fields are nervous about AI, that if AI is creating art or music. One way I look at it is that there's a whole host of people now who are very creative in their core, but they don't have the technical skills to release that creativity. So they can't play an instrument or they can't draw or paint. But will it be the case now that AI tools will bridge that gap, so that helping them with the missing technical skills and allowing them to unleash their hidden creativity? And that'll lead to a whole new set of things that are produced in the world.
Well, we're perfectly happy with the amount of comedians that there are at the moment, and we don't need any more. So we actually would like to sort of block that off if possible.
It's hard to know though, because it's some people can't play instruments, but it's so, the first time you ever go see an orchestra, it's so, the noise of it blows you away. If you ever did that, even if it's the school band playing at the musical, it blows you away, and it's not going to be the same as a machine playing it.
Like Beethoven, he's blind, isn't he?
Was Beethoven blind? Was Beethoven blind?
Was he deaf?
He was deaf, yeah.
But to have someone like that, to have like say a musical genius, likely had someone to assist in certain like musical notation or to bridge that gap to actually be able to actually get it out to people. I'm not the same as Beethoven. Right. But
We've said that on the podcast before.
We've covered this.
No, I was in my ma's attic and I was looking at all my old books that I had. And I had books on like filmmaking, I had books on writing, and I had books on all these things completely unopened. I did not have the attention span to read these books. And I always wanted to like make videos and make silly things and all these kind of... I didn't know on the horizon the technology was going to change to allow videos on Instagram, for example, to put videos out. And so I had this kind of hoop dream that was never gonna manifest, and I kind of knew it at the time. I'm not going to go to film school or whatever the route was, and I didn't know that around the corner technology was going to change to allow me to make short little videos on my phone in something this size, and that's something that I'm quite excited about, is that technology being on,
And I feel like I'm cautious. Not that I'm scared of it, like you were saying. I'm cautious about it, but I have used it in the work. I made the sketch about the election that time, and one of the takes was just on my phone, and one of the takes was real windy outside. And I was like, oh, for God's sake. And then I just pressed this button on the little editor I have on my phone that cost €80. And I pressed this button that was like, reduce wind noise. And it did. And my voice was clearer, and the wind was gone. I was like, I don't have to go back. I would have had to go back out and go do it again. I was even wearing different clothes. I was like, oh, save me so much hassle.
And they likely would have taken that whole audio, tried to interpret what was your voice, and kind of replicate, not even like remove.
I think it probably did.
Replicate.
It probably
But
did.
that's so.
This is all the glamorous, exciting bits.
Using AI as a tool seems to be what I'm hearing about a lot, and people are like, you need to learn how to use this new tool. And I get, I'm using ChatGPT wrong, and now there's a whole thing and how to communicate best with ChatGPT, and that's a skill. And now, like, companies are hiring people in who are experts, prompt engineers, and this kind of thing.
Are they chancers?
But this is what I mean.
We just got ChatGPT, and now it's like, I'm an expert. It's like, since when? You know what I mean? Like, when did you study? Like, what are you talking about? Is there a bit of tomfoolery going on as well?
There's certainly a skill to creating effective prompts for ChatGPT. How long that is going to be an important skill remains to be seen. But I think it speaks more deeply to the importance of understanding how these technologies work and understanding what the right way to communicate them with. We in basic computer science, when we're teaching computer science, we often don't start with programming. We start with problem-solving skills, because the programming is kind of the icing on the cake. What you really need to understand is how to look at problems and how to dissect problems and how to develop approaches for solving problems, and then you turn it into code.
So you do games and everything, like that kind of ludology.
Certainly it's the case that these generative AI systems are going to help with all of that as well.
Are you good at Ludo?
I couldn't do Ludo, but I just
really
know
like
ludology.
that Shane really wanted to throw in that he knew the term ludology.
Did you play
the
Ludo
study
in your
of games.
caravan?
Everyone shut up, right? We're doing this podcast for Science Week. I knew a scientific word, and I was correct.
I found with using, and I'm sorry just to be talking about ChatGPT, but it's obviously the most accessible one to use. So I was trying to come up with slags for a sketch for like a short person, right? And it wouldn't.
Slags like jeers rather than
Little
slags
jeers.
like who are
slags, yeah.
Yes.
Can you generate an image on Canva of a slag? No, it wasn't that. No, it was like insults that I could use that I, obviously wasn't going to use them verbatim, but I'd be like, oh, that's an aspect I hadn't thought about. I could do something with that. And it wouldn't do it. It was against their kind of violation, which I understand because it could be considered hate speech, but it also is limiting that. But not all AI will do that. And there might even be political aspects that you lean into that it wouldn't want to even talk about or even highlight or discuss. And obviously that's going to be a huge danger because we already have our own bubbles of our news sources and everything, but when people are when there's a chaperone of information,
there has to be a person who decides those.
What is essentially could be even history, because people stop using search engines and they go directly to the source.
So when are you censoring?
Yes. When are you censoring?
Even now, though, if you and long since, if you Google something, if you add in gay to it, Google is just going to tell you that's some kind of porn or something. Wow. So that's for adults. It won't do a fill in the examples. So you do this thing. And I always wonder who's decided that. Someone picks it. It's a similar question with the AI guys. Now you're talking to the engines, whatever they're called. Who is it people? Do people make those decisions and decide the ethics of their robot, if you will?
At the moment, I'm sure that is the case. There was a famous example a few years ago where I think it was Microsoft were experimenting with an early chatbot, which they then released on Twitter as a sort of Twitter bot. Yeah. So it would interact with other Twitter users. And after a couple of hours, their Twitter bot turned into a hate-spewing racist. Oh my God. Because that's what it saw on Twitter.
Yeah.
So, and it's difficult to predict that. So maybe you end up kind of over-constraining what these agents can do until you get a better feel for what's going to happen.
But that is like where, I suppose there is information being fed into it, and like where is that information like I just assume everyone says it's just being fed on the internet.
Yeah.
But then obviously, like what you say, like a lot of the internet is awful people saying awful lies and awful things.
Yeah.
Like how does the artificial intelligence or whatever discern that stuff? Like, is it like these neural networks, or how is it doing that?
It probably doesn't, is the short answer. Essentially, training these large language models, you're giving them huge amounts of text. It seems that what OpenAI have done is basically scraped all of the text they could on the internet and fed it in. And what those large language models are doing at their core is they're understanding what words come after what other words. They're predicting next words like predictive text, but they're doing it at a massive scale. And they're looking for patterns in that huge amount, terabytes and terabytes of text, looking for patterns. And those patterns are essentially what are controlling the responses of ChatGPT.
Okay. And those are written text, so they're
natural language.
They're not yet
text.
looking at audio transcription
People are using similar techniques to look at that. But there's a sense in which we don't fully understand what's going on in these large language models.
Really?
So there's a sort of emerging field of science called large language model science, which is scientists using large language models and poking at them to see what makes them tick.
They're kind of
almost like a neuroscientist poking at the brain.
They're all keeping their own counsel. They're like, we're doing this language stuff. It's none of your business at the moment.
Yeah. But we need funding, actually.
They're turning it. That's the thing. I keep thinking of HAL. We all thought, from Space 2001, Space Odyssey. What's it called?
Yeah, Space Odyssey.
Space
Yeah,
Odyssey.
I keep thinking of him, and he was so deadpan. But now they can just chat to you if they want. It's getting creepy.
They take breaths and everything.
So there's exciting things about medicine and all that stuff. Very exciting. But everyone's worried, and one thing's worried about, like you said, we're talking about the artists. ITV2 wanted to they invite somebody to give AI prompts to make TV show concepts, and they're going to give someone $100,000 to do that. And it's very upsetting for all the people who work in that industry. But then people are worried, it's getting all this information and trawling the internet. We all keep hearing this, but it's people's stuff. So it's journalists, writers, artists, bloggers, whatever it is. People's stuff is just being taken out of what they publish.
Roughshod over all of that copyrighted material.
And they just have it.
And I've seen now films. There was a film that was released recently, and it had a big certificate at the end saying no generative AI was used in any part of this production. And that seems to be almost like a kind of a quality seal or quality guarantee.
Are we in the Wild West now? Is it Wild West right now? Like you're saying, we're going to push towards. Are they allowed to just take that stuff? And
I think it's very unclear. I
Right.
doubt they are, and I think those things will start to play out in the courts over time. There's some obvious things that were wrong. So, for instance, some of the image generation tools trained themselves on stock photography from stock photography sites, and some of the images that are being generated back, you can still see the watermark. This was clearly that learned something from that site, and that was a copyrighted image. So I certainly it'll take time for this to shake out in the courts, but I think what we'll find is that companies will have to be much more careful about the data that they're using to train these chatbots. Because so much of that data is personal. The bits and bytes of our personalities are hidden in all of that data.
Like in 10 years, do you think we'll look back and go, well, that was this, the mid-2020s, it was a crazy time. It was a crazy time. You had models during is that the conversation they'll be having?
Is it Napster now? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, the idea that we could just have any song on Napster and LimeWire. We were all delighted with ourselves, teenagers, because we're like, every song we have in the world, we can just have it.
Well, I tell you, lads, I feel science weak at the knees from my big brain from learning so much about Barry right now.
Yes, and this week's episode is sponsored by Science Week. 10th to the 17th of November is happening. The theme is regeneration.
And you can find out all about that. Where can they find out about that?
At scienceweek.ie.
On the internet.
I think that's true, and I equally think that it'll lead to new types of business models that will be useful for creatives. Okay, so if you think about it, what does it? Suppose you've got an AI now that, in theory, could sing a song in the style of Taylor Swift. So, has there got to be a business model where Taylor Swift is going to benefit financially from that because someone is using her voice and likeness, even though it's actually not her voice. It's an AI trained to be her voice.
Okay.
But clearly, I could imagine the law there will be cases now which are being developed which will answer those questions. And it seems unlikely that the answer will be, oh no, Taylor Swift has absolutely nothing to do with that. That's fine. They'll go off and do what they want.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard Homer Simpson do an amazing version of Creep by Radiohead. It's,
Yeah.
I actually did hear...
He got
you know
Will
what?
Smith to wish his mum happy birthday.
I did, yeah, I did. No, I actually did genuinely listen to... There's a Weekend song, I Feel It Coming, and it has Michael Jackson's voice. It's actually better.
It's a fake Michael Jackson voice.
It's fake. It's totally fake, but it's Michael Jackson's voice put
There's
on
no
The Weekend.
guilt associated with liking it then.
But I never thought that there would be anything. I'd always thought, no, I'm going to lose the connection to it. But that is audibly moved into my headspace.
And one of the things we know about the music industry is they're pretty good at figuring out who gets paid and how much. So I think they'll figure that out. And it will.
Is it scary? They're going to figure out how to make money rather than go, this is bad, end this. They'll go, if we can turn a book. You know what I mean? Isn't that,
or they'll figure out how do we incentivize a whole host of other artists that ordinarily their creativity wouldn't be unleashed, wouldn't be available to the world because they don't have the technical skill to sing. But now they can produce it in the style of someone and the world wants that, it consumes it, so value is being generated and that value needs to be shared, not just back to them. They get some for their creativity, but maybe the Taylor Swifts of the world get something as well. That seems to be a fair apportioning of value.
But isn't it reducing the value of Taylor Swift's singing in and of itself, the inherent value of a good singer?
Yeah, but then would you not have said something similar for sampling? And yet sampling is now routine.
Yeah.
That's a good
I don't
point.
know.
And
See, it's only starting. It's only starting. We have to fight with
artists
these.
benefit when their songs are sampled and reused. So these are all new revenues.
But a lot of powerful people who already have power and control, they seem to be able to be in positions to steer at things now. Like somebody, big billionaires who own big tech companies,
Like
they
me.
can just like you,
Like
Tony.
he's pointing
But
at
then you're
Tony.
talking about your man from OpenAI.
Yeah.
They get to decide the ethics of their particular software at the moment. It's people like movers and shakers, like Taylor Swift, can control loads of things, and she changed how Spotify worked and all the stuff in a couple of years ago. So they can decide that, but then the person who's boys in a band with guitars and the thing, they're not going to be able to make any
It will be
thing.
tough,
But why, a more optimistic view of that is while it's the big companies now that are clearly controlling these AI models, there are lots of reasons to believe that these models will effectively become open sourced and commoditized. So I think the boy band in the garage will have access to these tools because that's what's happening in this technology space. Technology becomes cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, more and more powerful, and free for everyone to use.
Yeah,
So I think we will move in that direction.
Caveat that the Sleaze, my band, we don't use AI. That's pure raw Killer Sunday vocals. What's your?
Maybe you should use AI
don't
to get it on.
I should have
Spotify,
used AI. I should have
maybe,
used some
because
AI.
you're still in an issue trying to get that up there.
Well,
uploaded.
you're not just a professor. You're an entrepreneur as well, and you use AI in that sense. Like, what's your interest? I suppose in AI.
well,
Like, what do you like it for?
I've always been interested in getting technology out of the lab and into the marketplace. So most of my day job, it's either teaching or running a research group. And in your research group, you have PhDs that are working on their thesis and they'll develop technologies. And many years ago, one of the challenges that you're faced is how do you evaluate whether these technologies are any good? And I was interested not just in doing little small scale evaluations in the lab, but rather try and get this technology out into the marketplace, that the marketplace is really how you evaluate them. So I've been involved in setting up a couple of companies in years gone by. One of the ones that I'm known for is a company called Changing Worlds, which I set up with a PhD student of mine back in the day.
The world.
It was a good name.
Yeah.
Not necessarily.
But they changed it in the name of evil, though. That's
what I didn't tell you.
we worked on some of this was pre-iPhone days. It was right at the start of the mobile internet. And we worked on developing personalization technologies that would learn about people's preferences and essentially reconfigure mobile portals so that if you were interested...
Is it your fault that I spent my whole €10 credit on my WAP? Is that you?
Probably.
Did you do that?
Well,
so I was
we
trying to get one ringtone and then I ended up
Yeah.
spending the whole thing. Then I had to ask for more €10. My dad was like, "Where's your last €10?"
Would you remember
Scooter
WAP?
MP3 of all.
I remember the WAP. Yes.
What's the WAP?
WAP was like
he's a bit younger, so he doesn't get
text-based
it.
mobile internet.
Cost a fortune, 35 cents sometimes.
You'd want to get a ringtone, like there was like that song,
Crazy Frog.
Closing Time.
Yeah.
Closing Time. And it was monophonic ringtone at the time. So it was like ding, ding, ding. And you try and
the
get that
era
into your
of
whole WAP.
polyphony.
Yeah. You were right to
Yes,
phones and
yes.
polyphony.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we were... Funny story. We were
Oh,
trying
now
to...
we're enemies now. I was enjoying your company now. And now.
So we were trying to save you money.
Okay.
The reason
Yeah.
it cost you money that you had to go through all of these menus and you'd eventually get to that ringtone. What our software was doing is trying to figure out, he's looking for that ringtone. So show it to him on the front page. So it's one click away.
One click
Oh,
away.
yeah.
So
Okay.
it was learning those
It would
shortcuts
not. It'd
through
be
these
straight away
portals.
be Lady Gaga, and then you like Lady Gaga?
This is pre-Lady Gaga.
Pre Lady Gaga.
Now it's
Don't make
cookies.
assumptions about me.
You mention Lady Gaga all the time.
That's
Now
fair
it's
enough.
like,
Okay.
yes, you can have all my data. No, now I'm in a mood where no, actually, you can't have all my data. You know, when you're like deliberating whether you want to give your cookies over and you're spending most of your time on the internet.
Yeah,
right?
well, see, we do the cookies because of the GDPR and all those things that came in.
Ruined
That's
it.
supposed to look after and protect us, but they drive us all mad.
Yeah.
There's going to be things from this current explosion, you called it. There's going to be things soon that will be.
Well,
about
that's
that.
already happening.
We have to opt in, and we opt into things all the time. We don't realize
Yeah,
we're telling them they can take our stuff and teach their things.
Well, and there's the EU has introduced what's called the AI Act, which is a sort of first attempt at regulating AI usage. And there's different categories: high risk, medium risk, low risk, and AI companies and service providers are obliged to make sure they fully kind of audit how their systems are working, the data that they're using to train those systems, and the way that those systems are being used. So, you know, one of the classic problems is you could imagine a machine learning system that decides whether somebody gets a loan or not. And if that's been trained on biased data, then it's going to make biased decisions. So maybe, for example, it's giving more loans out to males than females. And there's plenty of examples of data sets that are biased.
The police
in that
were
way.
using it in policing as well.
Yeah.
And it was like,
Yeah.
you know, focusing on like certain neighborhoods and stuff
Predictive
like that.
policing is, I think,
And
it's one of the
racism,
high risk
yeah.
ones in
But
the
if you were
EU
a
Act.
judge, for example, and you had literally on paper, this is what this person did, and this is what this is what this African American did, and this is what this, you know, Caucasian did, you know, and just piece for piece, like what is the crime, and having to kind of level that out and give an average, you know. But of course, if you're pulling from previous data, that might skew the numbers. But there could be an opportunity to be more unbiased if those kind of decisions were made.
And that's what researchers are now looking at. Can we detect bias in these systems, and can we rectify the bias? And how do we build these systems more responsibly so that the bias isn't built in from the start?
It feels like talking about a movie, like a futuristic movie.
Yeah.
Well, it's not that futuristic anymore, but it feels like something you'd watch as a kid, and you'd be like, they developed this technology and then it got in the wrong hands. That's what it feels like. We're teaching. If we want to teach it to keep an eye on the biases, and bias is a huge part of everything we do all the time. It makes a mess of our lives all the time. It's part of human. But like, it feels like if it goes the wrong way, it could cause havoc. Is that not?
Well, I've even heard stories of, you know, AI, voice. I mean, I've made those things for people's birthdays using literally 30-second clips of someone talking on YouTube and the celebrity, and then having it write whatever I want. And if you have a voice note, I did it with a friend of mine, made a voice note that he had sent, and I used his voice to tell people in the stag that he wasn't coming because he had diarrhea. And it sounded exactly like him. And but I've heard stories about like families now having like, this is our safe word. So if you hear me calling and saying that I've been held ransom and you need to give money and it's my voice, ask me what the safe word is. And if I don't give you the safe word, that's a generated voice. Like, this is a reality. I've seen news stories where people have been, you know, fake held ransom. And then the next stage of that could be literally a model just taking these voices, doing it automatically, doing the pre-recorded text, and like a scam callers in the same way.
Yeah, I was worried about the scam callers. Yeah,
and that just being a factor. So that's already happening.
And
now.
deep fakes are a big problem. Like it can be genuinely difficult to distinguish between real and fake. You need to stop and think about it for a while. And this, again, back to the kind of fundamental skills of critical thinking and understanding how to interrogate information. That's going to be more important going forward.
Will there even be a forward with all of the energy that is needed to produce this? Will there just not be a massive husk of an Earth used for all the server farms?
I'm more excited about it now than I was earlier on, and I'm more hopeful of things like you say, medicine and the bison things. But the environment thing is so.
And at the moment, these large models consume a huge amount of energy, not just in the training of the model, but in the usage of the model. Like for every ChatGPT query that you submit, a huge amount of energy is taken up in answering that query, much more than a typical search engine query, So you're finding now that people are starting to think very carefully about the energy requirements. I even heard recently about that there's increasing interest in nuclear power, primarily because it's considered the only viable way or a viable way of responding to the power needs of these systems. So do you find that Google and Meta have their own little nuclear power station to run their LLM? I don't know. But having said all that, put that aside for the moment, researchers are very focused now on sustainable AI. And how do we build AI models that are as competent and as effective, but that require much less training energy or energy to train and use them? And there's an area called frugal machine learning, which is all about doing the same thing with much less data or much more cheaply. And that tends to be what you find. I think there's a sense in which these large language models today have been trained by throwing everything at them and hoping something good comes out. But clearly, intuitively, we might think that, well, do you really need to throw the entire internet at them? What about just picking the really good bits and training them on that?
So Tony's Instagram page, my Instagram page, that kind of thing.
So let's curate it to that, and then do you get a better model? So I think there are plenty of opportunities to make AI more efficient and more sustainable.
It's hard to put it aside though. Like all of the big tech companies, anybody involved, they've all quadrupled or more their carbon in the last 5 years. All of them. Even the water, just to keep all the data. The fresh water has to go into those things to keep it cool.
And what about the new energy solutions that will be found because we're getting AI to help us in that research?
And do you think that's in my head? I'm like, because I'm uninformed. I'm like, that sounds like a gamble.
No, but
is it a gamble or is it like we're going to get there?
It's not a foregone conclusion, but I mean, we've just, in a sense, solved, in quotes, protein folding, which we thought was a really hard problem.
Okay, yeah.
So I think there's every reason to be optimistic that there will be energy breakthroughs that happen in part because these AI systems are helping us to navigate through all of the various design options and bringing us faster to a more optimal design for maybe the next generation power plant. I think that's entirely plausible and probably likely.
And it does save a lot of time. Like we spent hours thinking about protein folding, and now we don't have to worry about it anymore.
I was losing sleep over that.
Every week, we're like, how do they do it? What about? Are you worried about your students, like in education? Are you worried that they're handing in essays that are just? Yep. I know people who I'm not going to name names, but I know people in education who are using it like it's in a way they are learning, but they're handing in essays or using it to help. Some French philosopher, what does that actually mean? And then maybe using it in that kind of sense. Are you worried about that?
Yep.
Yeah. Is there words like concurrently or therefore that your students would never use?
Yeah. Well, it's especially in coding because, these models are very good at writing computer code. I use them myself from time to time to write code that I just don't want to be bothered writing. ChatGPT will do a perfectly good job for certain types of things. That's not necessarily what you want students to be doing when they're supposed to be learning the fundamentals. So we do have to be careful, and we're changing the way that we assess students and tweaking the way that we assess students to make sure that what we're getting is authentic from them.
Is the level of cheating ahead of the level of software that can detect? Yeah.
There is a bit of an arms race there, so that detection software is improving, and then students realize, oh, that means I need to cheat in this way, maybe. So that's always going to be the case. Oftentimes it comes down to talking to a student, explain your answer to me. Can you explain why you did that? Why you did that?
Oh my
so
God, I'd be mortified.
So these are there are techniques that we can use at the same time, and especially in the software space. They will need to know how to use these tools. They will. The next generation of software engineers will be more productive because these tools are available.
But you're teaching them how to use the tools, and then they're using the tools against you because they're sneaking in.
I love that, sitting Tony down. Tony, you've just written one of the greatest essays I've ever read. Care to explain it?
I just flowed out of me last night. It must have been my third Monster energy drink. It just
that
came to
tipped
me.
it over the edge. These are lots of things. Okay, tool's a good word, right? We're looking for it, and it's kind of clean.
A lot of people describe Shane as.
But we know we're talking about a tool. But like, there's loads of things we're not allowed to have. It's different chemicals we're not allowed to have. Weapons. There's even literature we're not allowed to have. There's different things over the years. Everyone's allowed to have these tools. They're already being used in warfare and things. Is it okay that everyone can just have this right now, straight out the gate? Is it okay? Is it okay we're in this wave and explosion? Am I being scared?
I think at the moment, if you think about what ChatGPT is doing and is capable of, maybe that's okay. Yeah. But things are developing quickly, and it would be naive to think that everything's going to continue to be okay. And as governments start to realize how they can use these technologies, they will come up with some pretty scary applications. And it would be naive to think that, warfare and military applications aren't being explored at the moment. I'm sure they are.
And it's happening, right? It's been explored and exploited, and it's killing people now.
Yeah.
Or even just social discourse to create, fake, to create online trolls.
Absolutely. Most of the people tweeting in Ireland is AI software in America.
What's scary though is just that you kind of have to get on the bandwagon. It's like you sowing a field. I don't even know how you sow a field.
It's too late to opt out.
No, of course, we were all sowing fields
together. No, but it's like not having a seed drill. Do you know what I mean? If everyone has a seed drill, it's just like you kind of have to have it. And there's people who are optimizing their ability to use it that are probably going to very rapidly make a lot of money. And there could be a massive kind of divide of people who use it and people who don't use it. Especially for some of the more boring jobs.
I mean, we can't put that genie back in the bottle.
Yeah, that's it. It's too late to go I'm not getting involved.
And it would be naive to think that you could, even to think that you could regulate it back into the bottle, because not everyone is going to subscribe to that, and not every country is going to obey the same guidelines. But and even today, simple as the tools are, they can still be used very effectively and very negatively. Look at elections and deep fakes and fake content and targeting people with fake content. And that's very effective, very cheap to do, and very consequential. Yeah. So I think, again, it's not a great answer, but I think we do need to educate people. People do need to understand and be responsible for what they're consuming, and figure out that, you can't just read what you see on the internet and think, well, that's the way that is. You need to understand how to interrogate that, how to figure out if it's a reputable source. But that's going to be an arms race in and of itself.
Could you see elements of it going the way of like the Concorde, where it's like, it's a pretty fast plane, but it's pissing a lot of people off how loud it is? Do you know what I mean? Like, could it be a thing, but like, yes, it could feasibly do it, but it is not sustainable for, so like at the rate of how much data is being scraped, and how much energy that it uses. Could you see it, like you say, with a sustainable model, that we have a bit more of a quaint version of it in the future that we actually can use? Do you see it going that direction?
I could certainly imagine that. And I think it will be important for us to make it clear what the impact of this technology is, say on energy usage. So if you knew that by turning predictive text on your phone on, and this is a false example, but let's use it for the moment, that by turning predictive text on your phone on, you were going to consume a certain amount of energy. And do you want to do that? You might decide, no, I'm going to get rid of predictive text because I'm a bit more conscious of energy usage than that. I think they're the sort of conversations that we need to have. Maybe people are going to have to offset their carbon usage if they use AI systems. Equally, I think we're just going to find some of these systems aren't as useful as we first thought.
Yeah.
You know, so you try, if people get very excited about ChatGPT and say, oh, look, I can type in, create me a poem for my daughter's birthday, and it creates a perfectly useful poem. And then, but you know, it doesn't do much more than that, or, you know, it helps me with a few things. It's kind of like a good grammar checker for me, but I can't trust it to write the report I need at work because it makes stuff up, and it takes me as much time to check it than to use it. You know?
That was one of the funniest things, I think, when it first was like sort of released to the public and everyone was using it, and it was mind-blowing, and it was like, write me a song, and it would write you the song, and then you would ask it to say, like I remember I was like, write me a review of the recent, the new Scream movie that came out last week, and it was like, I can't do anything that was before 2001 or whatever, and I was like, this thing's shit. I was like, immediately I was like, this thing's not great anyway. And I'm like, you at the start it's like this big scary thing, but then you sort of, when you grapple and learn a little bit more about it, you're like, oh, okay, I understand its capabilities, and within that there's like, because I think people are very scared of it, and within that fear there might be a, like, I don't know, a public feeling to not, like, people, I would say on the majority are maybe anti-AI, and most people, I don't know. And like, if it's something we can use in healthcare and all that, and in many, many positive ways, like maybe we need to kind of change that and make people understand what
I think it would be a terrible shame if fear caused us to not take advantage of the technology in all the positive ways that it can be used. I think, again, this all comes back to education and understanding and being responsible and having a kind of long-term ethical view of how these technologies are developed and deployed. Because there are many, many very interesting applications. And some of the really big problems facing the world, climate change, for example, poverty, I'm sure that AI is going to be part of a solution there. It's not like there's an AI system to solve poverty or to solve climate change, but these systems are kind of superpowered research tools. They help researchers become more effective and more productive. And that in itself might lead to solutions to big problems more quickly.
But lots of your colleagues who are super well informed and well researched people about the climate change, they're just still ignored right now. So I'd be scared that like we can try and learn about ways to make it safer and more ethical, but it'll just never happen. Like the planet is in such danger already, and we don't fix it. Even smaller examples of that in Ireland, we know we should be planting a different type of tree, but we just keep planting the other tree. But they keep saying it should be this tree, and they're like, we're going to put this one in. That's we keep ignoring the things all the time.
I think you're right, and it's terrible, but that's not an AI problem.
No. Yeah. But that's an overall thing.
I once used it for a live commentary in Moulin Rouge. We were watching Moulin Rouge, and it was a thing where we kind of talk over the movie. And I went to ChatGPT. I was like, can I have 100 pieces of trivia about Moulin Rouge, one for every minute of the film as it's happening? And it gave me 100 pieces of trivia for like every minute. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. And like 70 of them were wrong. And I was there in front of an audience of 150 people, and I said, Jim Broadbent won an Oscar for this, and someone was like, Jim Broadbent's not even in this, or who was it? Was it the actor from Paddington who is not whatever? Hugh Bonneville. Yeah, it was like this is Hugh Bonneville who isn't in it. Hugh Bonneville won an Oscar from this, and someone was like, that's Jim Broadbent, and I'm like, oh my god, I have 90 more of these, and this is not applicable.
You could have asked ChatGPT which ones of these are real and which did you just
I didn't have that. Do my own research.
You need to get, what are they called?
Prompt
engineer.
And not the guys who advertise on Twitter. My Twitter, is, if I scroll that, it's constantly going, if you're not learning AI in 2024, you're doing that. I'm like, how do you I don't trust him.
I don't trust him.
Someone who's sponsoring an ad.
That's not even a real voice.
But again, again, it's down to tools, and new tools are starting to come available now that use the large language models just for the language understanding. So to give you a concrete example, Google have launched this thing called Notebook LM, Notebook Language Model. And you can upload your own data, so your own files into that notebook. And you can basically tell it to answer questions based on those files only. So you can imagine now, if you're studying, you upload a bunch of topics on various research that you're doing or your textbooks, and now you have got like an assistant, a teaching assistant. You can ask it questions and you can basically tell it, I don't want you to make stuff up and think of stuff you found on the internet. I want you to focus on those documents. That
Tell me what I think about this.
Yeah.
Wow.
Remind me what I thought about this.
Yeah.
What about when people die?
know.
Like you can
I love it.
create a version of a lost family member or something like that and talk to them and stuff. Is that
I've
not
heard
like,
that, yeah.
and that kind of thing? And using the image of people who have passed in ads and things like that. Like all the, like, do we own the copyright to our own faces and things like all that? It's also
That was a big thing in the actors' strike
Yeah.
that kind of delayed things for so long, was their likeness. And especially for extras, that's why I held off for so long, is because obviously people like, the big name actors don't really need to worry about that. They can have individual contracts, but extras literally could have their likeness scanned and then used.
They'd never get a job again.
Never get a job
Well,
again.
in the latest Star Wars movie, who was it? I'm blanking on the actor's name, but his likeness was used, and a digitally created character was used.
Oh yeah, they had like young Luke Skywalkers and things that he wasn't even there. Yeah. There's going to be people screaming at this podcast going, ask him this, ask him. I feel like
I know.
No,
It feels like we're just
we're running over time.
sitting in front of like a fountain of knowledge, and we're just like people will be like, "Why? Is it going to kill us all?
No,
Is it going to kill us all?"
I'm thinking they're going to be like, oh.
No, there's
that's what
loads,
I'm hearing
there's loads.
more from the
My
audience.
brain is buzzing.
Yeah, well, it's been an absolute delight having you on as an honorary young hot guy for the episode, Barry. Thank you so much for coming on.
Even though you did call yourself, what'd you say,
An old playing guy.
Old playing guy. Yeah.
Our rival podcast. Well, we're fast on our way to becoming old playing guys ourselves, so we'll maybe start a podcast together at some point in the future.
This is great, Barry. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thanks so much for listening to Young Hot Guys, and today was brought to you by Science Week.
They're attractive.
They're very attractive.
Hot and loud.
And a little bit sad.
He was the best guy around.
Oh my, is it hot in here or what?
You're an attractive guy.
It's the fabulous Tony Cantwell.
I'm talking about Shane Daniel Byrne. This show is part of the HeadStuff Podcast Network, a hub for the creative and the curious. Shows are produced in association with HeadStuff and the Podcast Studios Dublin. Find out more or become a member at headstuffpodcasts.com.